What do clinical trials have to do with public health? Well, they help to determine the safety and effectiveness of new medications, vaccines, and other medical interventions. By testing these treatments on human volunteers, researchers can gather important data about their efficacy and safety, which can then be used to inform public health policies and medical practices. But how do we ensure that there is diversity in those clinical trials and that marginalized populations are not being excluded? You're listening to the Public Health Insight Podcast, your go-to space for all things public health and global health, from the Sustainable Development Goals to the social determinants of health, as well as interesting dialogues about the diverse career opportunities that exist in these fields. Remember to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify so other people like you can benefit from our content.
Before we move on, it is important to note that the views expressed in this podcast are our own and do not necessarily represent any of the agencies or organizations we work for or are affiliated with.
My name is Gordon, your host for this episode, along with LaShawn Benedict as my co-host. What are you most excited about for this conversation, LaShawn?
There's a lot of things to be excited about. When you think about clinical trials, you're really thinking about where we're advancing biomedical knowledge. And part of this, in order to successfully advance biomedical knowledge in an equitable way, we need to ensure that the individuals we're recruiting to participate in these trials are reflective of our populations that we're serving. So I'm excited to dig a bit deeper into that.
Yeah, and in particular, how do they do that? I know during the development of the COVID-19 vaccines, some clinical trials were having difficulty recruiting diverse groups, and we found out how important that was to ensuring that we have a more comprehensive safety profile, efficacy profile for all these vaccines and how they affect people of different ethnicities differently. And so I'm really excited to hear about the technological piece, about how they're actually going about and doing that.
So let's introduce our guest.
Dr. Eddilisa Martin is the owner and CEO of M&B Sciences, a technology-focused life science firm. Dr. Martin has over 28 years of experience in the life science industry, including 18 years with Abbott Laboratories and AbbVie. She is responsible for ensuring that M&B continues to develop and leverage high-impact technology tools such as neighborhoodtrials.com that allows patients to participate in clinical trials within their homes and communities and increases access and equity in clinical trials. In addition to being a first-generation college graduate, Dr. Martin is also the first African American to receive a Doctor of Pharmacy degree from the University of Oklahoma College of Pharmacy. Dr. Martin, welcome to the Public Health Insight Podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here and look forward to our conversation.
Absolutely. And the first place we'll start, where we always start with all of our guests, is by visualizing your career as a Google Maps. Do you have your Google Maps ready?
Pull out your phone.
Got your GPS?
Are you serious?
No. Metaphorically speaking.
Metaphorically. Okay.
Metaphorically speaking. So how did you go from first completing your bachelor's of pharmacy degree from the University of Arkansas to now being the CEO of M&B Sciences?
So,
tell us about that journey,
yes,
twists, turns,
yes,
detours.
Yes. So going from getting my bachelor's in pharmacy, it's really interesting because I really don't have any pharmacists or any advanced medical professionals. My mother was a nurse, but she was a licensed practical nurse, and that really got me interested in healthcare, but I knew I didn't want to be a nurse. That's not in my, kind of DNA, but I knew I wanted to be in the healthcare field. So interestingly, at that time, I was a single mother and was a single mother at the age of 18. So I knew that I wanted to do something that would be able to take care of me and my son. And I knew I had kind of a science, math mind. And so interestingly enough, I went to a career day that was sponsored by the University of Arkansas for Medical Sciences. I went to the table for speech pathology, the table for physical therapy, went to the table for pharmacy. And that resonated with me. And so from there, I completed my bachelor's degree in pharmacy, and I knew that I wanted to go ahead and get my doctor of pharmacy degree. And I had been cautioned that if I took time between the degrees, I may not move on. So I immediately went on to my doctor of pharmacy degree and met lots of professors and had a very interesting course that we just called our seminar, where there would be guest speakers that would come in from all different areas of pharmacy to talk about the different opportunities and things you could do as a pharmacist. And so I originally went into hospital pharmacy, but at the time that I graduated from my Doctor of Pharmacy program, I knew I wanted to be in the pharmaceutical industry. But as you may know, oftentimes to get into the pharmaceutical industry, you still need other background and experiences. They don't really take a lot of people that are totally green. And so I worked in hospital pharmacy. I worked in what is called pharmacy benefit management at an insurance company, and then began to really closely interact with people in the pharmaceutical industry while I was working in the pharmacy benefit management. And got that opportunity to find out about open positions, and then got my dream job in the pharmaceutical industry. At that time, it was my dream job. So as you guys may know, though, when you're in the industry, one of the things that you do a lot is look at data on clinical trials. And one of the things that you constantly see is like the typical profile of somebody who participates in a clinical trial. And it used to be like a running joke that the average, and maybe it still is, the average clinical trial participant is the 50-year-old white male that weighs 70 kilograms. And so that oftentimes doesn't represent the people who the drug or diagnostic or whatever therapeutic is going to be used in once it's approved. And so that began to gnaw at me a little bit, on top of an interesting kind of personal story where we had a family member who was diagnosed with a life-threatening illness. And at that time, my husband and I were trying to figure out what can we do to help this person. And he was able to find like a cutting-edge NIH clinical trial that we were able to get her connected to, get her signed up for, and this was over 20 years ago. And so she participated in that clinical trial, and she attributes that trial to saving her life. So that was kind of an interesting personal background story that had always kind of been there over the years, really feeding into our desire to want to do something in clinical trials. So eventually, a few years ago, taking that leap and leaving my very nice, comfortable job at a pharmaceutical company, feeling like that, and really believing that I and my company can make an impact in clinical trials, in diversifying the participant population in clinical trials. And so that's what I took the leap of faith to do.
Wow. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. And it seems like there was many sources of inspiration for you to get on this path. So that's wonderful to hear. And so it just to me, when I think about this, the step from your educational training, your years of experience in pharmacy in different settings, and then coming together to create M&B, like that's incredible. Can you tell me a bit more about what M&B is, a brief overview of your company and what your role as CEO looks like?
So M&B, we have, I guess I would say, offerings or services really along two major lines. The, I guess, smaller line would be we have expertise in qualitative research, and so we do focus groups, survey research, and that part is really important in finding out what the patient voice is, what's important to the patients. And so we have that expertise in doing that qualitative research, or as I said, focus group survey research, and analyzing that type of data. And so we've done that for some of our larger, pharmaceutical company sponsors, some of the smaller ones as well too. Our larger, I guess, services that we offer is in patient recruitment in clinical trials, with an emphasis on increasing the diversity in the clinical trials. So really diversity is woven throughout everything that we do. So a lot of even the focus groups and survey research is around pulling out some of those interesting things and needed to know things around diversity. But the patient recruitment and increasing diversity in clinical trials is very, very important to us. So those are the two kind of major lines of things that we do.
Can you fit in the puzzle where you fit in as the CEO? Like, what do you see on a day-to-day in your role?
As a CEO, it's just like everything, it's just running a small business. So, a lot of business development and interacting with the sponsors who are interested in utilizing our services to really kind of help them understand what we do and how we feel like we can help them meet some of that unmet need with regard to recruiting patients in clinical trials. And then those just day-to-day things with running a company, you got to meet payroll, you've got HR benefits and those type of things. So it is juggling a lot of things as the CEO. And then overseeing, of course, the project management and making sure that things that you are doing for your customers are going well. When problems come up, how do we fix those? But making sure that those things are running smoothly and that we are doing what we say we're going to do for our customers. It's a lot.
And yeah, and you talked about a lot of that business acumen piece and originally going to school for pharmacy. So how did you develop those skills over time? Did you have mentors? Did you learn throughout the process? How did that come about?
So that is such a great question and probably could be the topic for a whole nother podcast. So one of the things that I have leaned on, because I am a pharmacist by background and I don't have an MBA or any business training. So I have made use of things that have, been offered to me, different professional development programs. Actually, I'm currently in a mentor protege program with Eli Lilly right now, where they are taking kind of like 7 small diverse businesses kind of under their wing. Well, not all of them are small, but diverse businesses under their wing and teaching them the ins and outs of doing business with a pharmaceutical company, doing things like business strategy, HR, marketing. And so it really is important if you don't have that business expertise to take advantage of any opportunity like that comes your way. On my shelf back there is a little dragon. I participated a couple of years ago in a Merck Drexel, almost like what I called a mini MBA in 4 months, So it is important to try to teach yourself those things that you don't know to make your business successful. And like I said, it's a whole nother topic. I've seen so many people who are talented across many areas, whether it's in healthcare or marketing or restaurant or what have you, that really have something good that they're offering, but they don't know how to run their business and it fails. So it really is important to kind of humble yourself. And if somebody wants to teach you something, make yourself open to that. If there are courses or other things that professional development you can do, avail yourself of that, because it is really, really important when you're a clinician or a subject matter expert, but you don't know how to run a business. So, and I will say there have been a lot of things that have been trial and error and learning things the hard way. So to the extent that you can avoid that, it's good to have mentors and people who can teach you. I haven't had a whole lot of mentors necessarily in this space. I am to the point of getting more and more of those now. And so, like I said, this mentor protege program, I'm so happy to be in right now.
Awesome. And speaking of being out of the element, as far as clinical trials go, that's pretty out of my element for me. So to set the stage for our discussion, could you describe what a clinical trial is and what does the process typically look like for clinical trials?
So a clinical trial, it's research. So you have a question that needs to be answered that you don't know the answer to. And so in a clinical trial, there may be a therapeutic, a drug or IV, or there may be a diagnostic procedure, or there may be even a surgical procedure that has promise and has shown kind of like some preliminary positive results in cells or in computer modeling or in a lab. But the next phase is that we need to take that and test it in humans. And so we need to do that in a rigorous way where certain biases are controlled, whether that's in the environment or the type of people. And so oftentimes, and really the best way is if the study can be randomized. So you're going to have a protocol that's going to be developed either by the sponsor or an investigator that really is going to lay out everything that's going to be done in this clinical trial. So we're going to get a roadmap, kind of that Google map, so to speak, of how things are going to be done. What the drug is, what the dosages are, what your safety measures are going to be, how many tests, when, where, how, etc. So that's kind of your roadmap. And so then you get your volunteers that are going to participate. And I say the volunteers in clinical trials are the VIPs because nothing can happen without them. So you will have your volunteers who will find out about it through their physician or through clinicaltrials.gov or neighborhood trials app, etc. And they will get an informed consent that anybody who participates in a clinical trial should make sure that they're getting the informed consent information totally at a level where they understand it, that they get to ask all the questions and make sure that they're answered to their satisfaction. But that is the person saying, okay, I'm volunteering for this trial. I understand what I'm going to go through. I understand what's going to happen to me. And so then the therapy or whatever would be administered to them. You know, the safety measures are going to be taken when they said they were going to be taken. And then all of that data would be analyzed at the end to say, yes, it was effective. Yes, it was safe. And this is something that needs to move forward. So there is that balance of safety and efficacy because you can have something that's very effective, but if it's not safe enough, then it can't move forward. So it's got to kind of hit on both cylinders that it's safe and effective enough to move forward. I hope that explained it a little bit.
That was really, yeah.
Yeah, it did.
I've heard the explanation 100 times and I've never heard it that simple. So I appreciate that thought process that goes behind that.
Well, I think it's important. I mean, clinical trials are so important. As I said, volunteers are the VIP, but volunteers are the everyday person in the community. And so you don't want things to be so convoluted and complicated that they don't understand what's going on. So we want to be able to explain it and answer all their questions and make sure they feel comfortable and knowledgeable.
Right. So let's talk about a bit more about those VIPs. So it's come to mine and Gordon's understanding that the FDA has now mandated that in clinical trials, they need to take the necessary efforts to have diversity in these trials. But before we get there, could you share a little bit about those patient demographics prior to these changes?
Sure. So the demographics in general, I mean, there's so many different data sources that you can go to, but according to the FDA, the demographics in clinical trials are probably anywhere from 70 to 80% white. People of color are severely underrepresented in clinical trials. And I would say people of color, more so meaning Black and Hispanic. So we generally tend to have fairly good representation from the Asian population, but Black, Hispanic, and definitely American Indian, Pacific Islanders are very, very severely underrepresented as well. So depending on the particular disease state, it varies, but on average, I would say for Black people, the participation is probably about 5%. So there is a range in that. And so, for instance, obviously, if you look at a sickle cell trial, there are going to be a higher percentage of Black people participating. But surprisingly, in cardiovascular trials, the participation rate is anywhere from like 1% to 4%. So wow. You really have your overall number, but it's really important to break it down because you know how averages work. The average, you know, if you're factoring in things like sickle cell trials into that average where you know there's going to be a predominantly Black population, when you average it out across other disease states like cancer or cardiovascular disease, you really begin to see how underrepresented people of color are in clinical trials.
Mm-hmm. But what's the big deal? We're testing medical interventions on these VIPs, And at the end of the day, like you said, we want to know the safety profile and if there's efficacy with this medication or intervention. So why does it really matter that we have representation in the trials in the first place? Aren't we all humans?
Yes, we are. We are all human. But there are some variations that come into play. Some of that could be actually physiological. Some of it could be the cultural impact of, maybe the diet and the way that you do things within your community that can have an impact on the ultimate efficacy of a treatment. So it's really, really interesting. And I was listening to an ASCO. So ASCO is the American Society of Clinical Oncology. So I was listening to a presentation there, and it really stuck with me, where the presenter was saying in the early 70s, we didn't have disparities or differences in the outcomes of breast cancer and colon cancer trials between black and white. But every time there's an advancement that's been made, that disparity has grown and gotten wider and wider. So the fact is, there are two things that I think cause that. And I think it's because of access to the innovative things when they become available, but also lack of representation in clinical trials. So I don't know how much you know about cancer, where, genetic testing and precision medicine is really taken off. Well, if you are doing genetic testing in a population that is predominantly of European ancestry, then when you have people of color whose results may not really reflect what's been tested, then it leaves the provider with wondering what to do. How do I fit them into, what the genetic testing says should be done with this profile? Or, if I'm looking at precision medicine, how should I treat them with this drug that's targeted toward this profile if they don't fit the profile? And so they don't fit the profile because they weren't involved in the genetic testing database, or they weren't involved in the clinical trials to have enough of their genetic material represented. So that's a real world impact where we've seen improvements in breast cancer, colon cancer survival, but we've seen it go like that, where everybody, had an improvement, but then you have the greatest improvement for the white population, and then the improvement for black people, it's improved, but it has not improved at the rate that it has for white people with regard to colon cancer and breast cancer survival, as an example. So that matters, as I said, because we have not had great representation in oncology trials. The black participation, and depending on the disease state, is anywhere from 1% to 4%. So we have examples in a lupus trial where a drug was tested, and lupus is 2 to 3 times more common in black women, but there weren't enough black women in the clinical trial. So when the drug was approved and it began to be used in black women, it didn't work as well.
Wow.
So the company had to do additional trials, additional dosing, etc., to find out what worked. But this is a drug that went through the whole approval process and begun to be used, but because there wasn't enough representation in the trial, it was inaccurately extrapolated or generalized to that black female population, and it didn't work, or it didn't work the way they expected it to. So it has implications there, because then we begin to generalize or start using this in everybody when everybody wasn't represented in the clinical trial.
So we are all humans, but we can be different at the same time.
We can be different. There are different ways that people metabolize things. I'm not going to get into to all of the enzyme systems and such, but there are different ways that some groups metabolize drugs. So that's important in many things, including oncology, including diabetes, hypertension, all across the board.
Wow. And it really does show that, what you're saying is that there are indeed these clinical outcome differences between some of these trial outcomes because of the lack of diversity. And it just goes to show that the FDA rule change, or that mandate that they changed, is for the better good, because it's allowing there to be more considerations in clinical trials to talk about diversity and to talk about more recruitment of how to do these things. So it's really good to see that. And we'll get a bit more into that in a second. But before that, I want to take you into our rapid fire segment called Insight Blitz. Are you ready for a little rapid fire?
I hope so.
It's going to be
Let's
all
see.
good. All right. So, Insight Blitz, we're going to be asking you questions or read some statements, and you're going to be providing us with a brief response.
Okay.
Let's begin. What is your favorite thing to do in your spare time?
My favorite thing to do is probably read. I'm a member of a book club, and so it provides me really a chance to have wine and drink with my friends, but I need to know the book as well. So probably read. I also sing.
Okay. The next question, can you sing for us?
Ah!
Just joking. What is your favorite food?
Ooh. My favorite food, I'll give a general category, seafood. Seafood. I will say no calamari though, no octopus, so kind of, I guess, regular seafood, fish, shrimp, lobster.
Yep.
I'm not exotic.
That's my kind of dinner too.
All right, more of a controversial question here.
Uh-oh.
Arkansas, Oklahoma, or California?
It's got to be Arkansas. That's where I was born, and so it's always home to me. I'll love it to the day I die. Arkansas.
Home roots, love that. How does one break into government consulting with little experience?
Networking. Networking, conferences, reaching out to people that you found who are in the industry. Surprisingly, people are often afraid to reach out, but people want to help. If you ask somebody for coffee or 15, 30-minute conversation, more likely than not, they're going to reciprocate.
Yep, that's been my experience too. People are more than happy to help, but I feel like one of the biggest barriers is reaching out to people and the fear of rejection and not being heard. So valid points, but yeah, definitely have seen that too in my experience. What has been your favorite part about creating and operating your own company?
I think the favorite part is the potential for legacy. We're a small company now, but we're growing. And I don't know how much, the audience or about the big boys in clinical research, IQVIA, ICON, ParExcel. So why can't there possibly be a Black-owned IQVIA or ParExcel? So that's kind of my big dream for the company. So yeah, I think that's probably the most exciting thing, the potential for legacy for my family, my children, our community.
I love that. In control of your own destiny through this. Love that.
Yes.
And finally, list at least one important trait that is important for innovation in healthcare and community health.
Oh, one important trait has got to be open-mindedness and kind of forgetting. I don't want to say forgetting what you've done in the past or forgetting what's worked in the past, but really building and learning from that, getting rid of that, well, what we always do is, So just being open-minded, brainstorming with no bad ideas and giving things a try, even if it's uncomfortable, even if you haven't done it before, give it a try. Do a pilot project of some sort.
Love that. And that brings us to the end of the Insight Blitz segment. How was that? Not too bad,
Not
right?
too bad.
Yeah.
We made you more nervous than you needed to be.
Maybe so.
by hyping it up.
I'm not a spontaneous person. My husband tried to surprise me with a trip one weekend, and I was like mad the whole time. Where are we going? What are we gonna do? I don't know. I want to know what's about to happen.
That's so, I can relate. My wife's similar, and I learned my lesson.
Yes.
After trying that one time. Thank you for listening to the Public Health Insight Podcast, your go-to space for informative conversations, inspiring community action. If you enjoy our podcast, be sure to subscribe and leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. See you in the next one.